Hi, my name's Bill. I thought I was just going to see my daughter. Maybe drop off a gift, share a story, nothing big. But then I saw my wife's car parked right outside her ex-husband's place. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just one bad night. This was years of quiet betrayal. They didn't just lie, they erased me. And what I found next changed everything. It was one of those rare mornings when everything felt still. No buzzing phones, no errands, just me, the open road, and the rustling sound of dry leaves tumbling across the pavement. The sky was overcast, that soft gray that makes you feel like time slowed down a bit. I was on my way to my daughter's house to help her fix the garage door. I hadn't been over in a while. Retirement changes your rhythm. You drift into routines. Early coffee, yard work, maybe a game on the radio. But when Emily called and asked if I could come by, I didn't hesitate. There's something quiet and dignified about being needed again. Teresa had decided to stay home. She said she had laundry to catch up on. Odd, usually she'd tag along, use the chance to see Emily. But I didn't think much of it. We'd had a minor spat a few nights ago about trust. Nothing big, just one of those late-night things where words get sharp for no good reason. I chalked it up to both of us being tired. She kissed my cheek that morning, said, "Drive safe," and that was that. As I neared Emily's neighborhood, I took the old shortcut, Maple Drive, the one that curves past those larger homes, the ones with columns and manicured lawns. I don't know what pulled my eyes to the driveway of that pale yellow house, but there it was. Teresa's car. I know every inch of that silver Buick. She hit a parking post a few months ago, left a dent on the back bumper. We joked about it, called it her badge of honor. Seeing it there, parked outside a house I vaguely remembered, my chest tightened. That was her ex-husband's house. Jim. I hadn't thought of him in years. I pulled over slowly, parked across the street under a tall maple that had lost half its leaves. My hand rested on the steering wheel longer than it should have. My mind ran wild, then stalled, then ran again. She hasn't talked to Jim in years, I whispered to myself. She said they don't even text. Still, there it was. Her car. And not a look-alike. Hers. The bumper dent was too specific. My fingers curled around the wheel. Instinct screamed. Logic whispered. I stayed put. I waited. The curtains moved slightly. Someone passed by the window. A woman, maybe, hard to tell. My thoughts bounced like a loose ball in a small room. Could it be a coincidence? Maybe she was dropping something off. Maybe it wasn't even her. But that dent. Then the door opened. It was her. Teresa stepped out, hair down, coat unzipped. She wasn't alone. Jim followed her, holding a coffee mug like it was just another lazy Saturday. They were laughing. Not polite laughter. Intimate. Familiar. She touched his arm the way you do when the past doesn't hurt anymore. The way you do when it's not just friendship. I didn't move. I don't know how long I sat there, heart thudding like it wanted out of my chest. Something inside me shifted. Not rage, not yet. Something deeper. Something old. Like betrayal had been sitting in a back room all these years and finally cracked the door open. There's got to be a reason, I told myself again. My jaw clenched as memories came flooding in. Canceled vacations, weekends I gave up so she could grow her small business. Times I swallowed my pride because we were building a future together. Fool me once, shame on you, I muttered. The rest of the saying hung in the air. I started the engine but didn't drive off right away. My eyes stayed on the house, on her, on him, until they disappeared inside. I could have turned around, could have walked up to that door and knocked, made a scene. But I didn't. That's not how I was raised. Back in the Midwest, you don't air your dirty laundry in public. You take it home, you fold it, and you figure out how it got so dirty in the first place. So I drove on. Each turn of the wheel carried a new question, new doubt. When did she change her phone password? Why had she started going out more? That fundraiser she said she stayed late for, was it even real? I pulled into Emily's driveway slowly, still playing the good father role. Still breathing. But something had cracked inside. The kind of crack that doesn't heal the same. I opened the car door and stepped out. Took one deep breath. But the moment I walked into my daughter's house, something else was waiting for me. A second blow I didn't see coming. My daughter opened the door with a smile that didn't quite know where to land. It hovered somewhere between polite and strained, her eyes darting past my shoulder, then back again. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel something different. Not wrong, not yet, but off. "Hey, Dad, you came alone?" she asked casually, too casually. I nodded. "Yeah, your mom had some things to do at home." I tried to sound normal, like I hadn't just seen Teresa laughing with her ex-husband across town. Olivia stepped aside to let me in, her arms wrapping around herself in that old habit of hers. The house smelled like lavender, one of those scented candles she used when she was anxious. That smell took me right back to the night she called off her engagement to that college boyfriend years ago. Lavender always meant something was being hidden. "Wallace out?" I asked. She nodded quickly. "Yeah, errands." Her tone suggested I shouldn't ask more. We moved into the living room. Furniture had been rearranged, new pillows, coffee table pushed to the side. What struck me was what was missing. No sign of Wallace, no work laptop, no sneakers kicked off by the door. His presence had been scrubbed clean, or maybe just carefully put away. "You want some tea?" Olivia asked, already halfway to the kitchen. "Sure," I said, settling into the armchair by the window. I glanced at the fireplace. No photos of Wallace there either. Just framed school art from our grandkids and a family photo that looked 5 years old. When she came back with the tea, her hand trembled just enough for a few drops to spill on the tray. She cursed under her breath and dabbed at it, not looking at me. "Everything okay with you two?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She didn't pause. Yeah, just work stress. He's been traveling a lot." Too quick, too clean. We sat in silence after that, sipping tea and pretending it was just a normal Saturday. We made small talk, weather, football, the kids' upcoming Halloween costumes, but every word felt like it was walking on glass. After a while, I stood up. "Mind if I use the restroom?" "Of course, go ahead. Same place," she said, already reaching for her phone. The hallway was dim, the kind of quiet that makes sound travel further than it should. I passed the guest room and paused near the stairwell when I heard her voice, low but sharp with urgency. "He showed up." "No, I don't think he knows yet." There was a pause. Then, I know. But what was I supposed to do?" My breath caught. My legs froze where I stood. She was talking about me. I didn't move for a few seconds, just stared at the hallway rug, the same one Teresa picked out on sale 2 Christmases ago. I backed away slowly and flushed the toilet before returning to the living room. Olivia was seated again, phone gone, eyes wide with forced calm. "I was thinking about staying for lunch," I said, watching her carefully. "Sure, that'd be nice," she replied, voice a little too high, smile a little too flat. I didn't eat much. My appetite had already taken a hit across town. Now it was twisting into something else, something raw and sour. After we cleared the dishes, I leaned back in my chair. "Liv, is there something going on I should know about?" She looked down at her hands. I noticed her wedding ring was gone. She blinked slowly, lips pressing together. "Dad," she started, then stopped. Her eyes shimmered, not from sadness, but restraint. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked. "But Mom's not who you think she is anymore." The words sat between us like broken glass. "You've known?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Not everything, just pieces. But the pieces don't add up anymore." She hesitated, then added, "Please be careful. Whatever you're starting to suspect, it's bigger than you think. She's not the same woman you married." I waited for her to go on, but she didn't. Her mouth shut like a vault. The silence told me there was more, but it wasn't coming from her. Not today. When I left Olivia's house, the air felt colder than when I arrived. The clouds had thickened overhead. I drove slowly, replaying every word, every glance, every hesitation. There was a time I felt like the foundation of this family, solid, unshakable. Now, I felt like the last one to know a secret everyone else had already rehearsed. People think betrayal is loud, shouting, broken dishes, slammed doors. But sometimes it's just lavender in the air and a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I pulled into my driveway, shut off the engine, and sat there a moment longer. Then I saw the blinking light on my phone, voicemail. I pressed play. The voice on the other end was familiar, but what it said shook me to my core. I lingered in Olivia's living room longer than necessary, watching shadows gather in the corners. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long lines across the carpet. A crumpled envelope poked out of the trash can, white paper, edges torn, addressed to Delilah. I recognized her handwriting. Why would Olivia let that stay where I might see it? Soft music drifted overhead, one of the old vinyl records she once loved. I remembered her dancing in the kitchen years ago. Uncertain then, radiant now. But this felt dissonant. The smell of Delilah's perfume lingered down the hallway, unnatural in this house. I told myself maybe they had dinner here earlier, or maybe it came from her jacket. I excused myself, claiming I needed to see something in my study. I drove home in my mind, replaying every bit of the day. In the quiet of my own writing room, I let the whisper echo again. He showed up. No, I don't think he knows yet. My phone vibrated. Teresa's number flashed, and I hesitated. I didn't answer. Instead, I tapped voicemail. Olivia's voice. Dad, I'm sorry about what I had to tell you earlier. I froze, staring at the screen. Her tone, so heavy with regret, wasn't apology so much as warning. I replayed it twice. Had to tell you meant she was bound by necessity, something bigger. My safe drawer creaked. Inside, under old tax folders, I found something I should have sorted years ago. Joint property documents. One page had Delilah's name penciled over mine. Margin note. After divorce, transfer 50%. No signature. I sat back, mind in overdrive. When had she been doing this behind me? I saw her years ago insisting on handling investments for us. I pressed my palms to the album stack, the photo box, every memory flickering, raises, vacations, foundations we built together. The pattern formed itself in my mind. She didn't just wander back into his home, she rearranged my entire life. The small betrayals lining up, her late nights, sudden absences, the hush when I asked. I remembered that old line I once read. You can't run a ship by steering backwards. Felt apt now. I resolved. No more swallowing doubts, no more pretending things were normal. I would act, with purpose, not desperation. Later, I drove to Olivia's under the guise of dropping off the ledger files I kept. I saw Teresa's car in the drive. I entered quietly. Olivia stood in the foyer with her back to me. I handed her the files. Just old accounts. I thought you should have these. She nodded, but her eyes said she understood far more than I ever knew. I turned and walked out before she could protest. And in the silence behind me, I vowed that I would unearth every hidden line in those files, every scratched name, every erased signature. This was more than suspicion. This had become war. As I merged onto the road, my phone lit up. A message. I'm watching you when you think no one is looking. The ride home was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Olivia's voicemail still echoed in my head, and that half-heard whisper from earlier felt like it had its own pulse, thudding just under my ribs. As I turned onto my street, the leaves kicked up in the headlights, orange, dry, scraping across the asphalt like they knew something I didn't. I slowed at the driveway. My hand rested on the gear shift longer than necessary. This house used to be comfort, safety. Now, stepping through the door, it just felt invaded. The moment I entered, I caught it. That perfume. Delilah's. Not just a whiff on a scarf. It was fresh, like she'd been here not long ago. And on my study desk, her pen. She always used that cheap, gold-plated one, said it made her feel put together. She'd left it, on purpose or by accident, I didn't know. But she'd been here, without telling me. An hour passed with me just standing by the window when the doorbell rang. Delilah, holding a casserole like it was 1983. I thought you might not be eating right, she smiled, stepping in before I said a word. Her voice was sweet, but that smile, too perfect, too posed. I was in the neighborhood. Figured I'd check in, she added, walking past me like she still lived here. I followed her to the kitchen, watching her set the dish down like nothing was broken between us. "How's Olivia?" she asked, tone light but eyes scanning the counter, like she was checking if anything had moved since the last time. "She's fine," I said. "How did you hear something was wrong?" Delilah looked up. "Oh, people talk." Her words hung in the air. She tried to soften them with a chuckle, but my gut told me she wasn't here for pleasantries. Dinner was mechanical. I barely touched the casserole. Delilah, always good at pretending, kept the small talk going. Church friends, a neighbor's dog, gas prices. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on her phone screen lighting up beside her plate. She picked it up quickly, tried to hide the glance, but I caught it, a preview of a message from Caleb. He still thinks he owns the place. The tone was mocking. I excused myself. Stepped down the hall to the living room, grabbed my laptop, and pulled up our shared email account, one she claimed we hadn't used in years. Password still worked. There it was. Threads of conversation between her, Caleb, and someone named Nettie. Mentions of asset transfers. Timelines. One message read, "If he checks the trust documents, stall." I sat there for a long minute, the room spinning slower than my thoughts. I closed the laptop gently and walked back to the table. "I saw the emails," I said, not loud, just clear. Delilah blinked, tilted her head like she'd misheard. "Bill, you've been under a lot of stress lately. Memory slips happen to all of us, especially at our age." My jaw clenched. Gaslighting. That's what this was. Telling me I didn't see what I just saw. "You're not yourself," she continued, placing a hand on mine. "I worry about you, that's all." I stood, pulled my hand away. "I'll look into everything," I said, "and I'll do it without pretending I've forgotten who I am." She stayed seated, calm as a lake in winter. "Of course," she said, picking up her purse like this was a polite visit. She didn't slam the door on her way out, just eased it shut, like she knew it wouldn't be long before she was back in this house. Once she left, I locked the door and went straight to my study. I opened the laptop again and started printing every single document. Then I pulled out the last 2 years of tax records, laid them beside the email threads. It was all coordinated. Every trip she took, every time she insisted I let her handle things. The bank drafts, the notarized signatures I never remembered signing. A pattern forming not by accident, but design. I sat down, shoulders heavy but spine straight. I wasn't broken, not yet, not close. "She thinks I'll fade quietly," I muttered aloud. "She's about to see how loud silence can be." I called Olivia and asked her to come by for dinner, just her and me. After what I'd uncovered in the emails, I needed to see her face when I asked the questions I'd been holding back. She showed up not long after sunset, wore a light sweater like she'd just come from a long walk, but there was a stiffness in how she hugged me, half-hearted, like she wasn't sure if she should. I noticed her eyes didn't meet mine for more than a second. On the table, I'd set out a bottle of wine, Delilah's favorite. I didn't plan it, or maybe I did. Either way, Olivia noticed. Her glance lingered on the label. I pretended not to. We sat down, but the food barely got touched. She made small talk about work, said she was tired, and I nodded along. But when I asked, "Are you protecting her?" her fork paused mid-air. She didn't answer, not directly. After dinner, I stood to collect plates, said nothing else. But my mind was already laying traps. There was a knock at the door, Delilah. Carrying another casserole dish and a vase of flowers like we were living in a Hallmark movie. "I thought I'd drop this off, didn't want Olivia driving back empty-handed," she said with that practiced voice. Warm, but hollow. Olivia excused herself quickly, went to the restroom, or maybe just to escape. Delilah and I were left alone in the kitchen. She pulled a small wrapped box from her purse and slid it across the table toward me. "Thought you'd appreciate this. Been cleaning out some drawers." Inside was a photo album, leather-bound. Looked old, but not worn. I opened it slowly. First page was blank, next blank. Third page, finally a photo of our wedding, but beside it the caption had been removed. No date, no location, just white space. "Some pages were too worn," she said with a little laugh. "Thought I'd give you room for new memories." I didn't smile. I kept flipping. Some photos were missing entirely. Others were rearranged out of order. It wasn't nostalgia, it was revision. A cleaner version of what we had. One where I was slowly being edited out. Delilah watched me like a hawk in silk. "You can't fight the narrative I choose," she said quietly. I closed the album, looked her square in the eye. "But I can reveal it." She gave a half smile, icy, and turned to leave. Didn't slam the door, just vanished, like fog. I stayed there a while, hands on the album, then walked to my desk, picked up my phone. Buried in my old messages was one I hadn't noticed, from months ago, from Delilah, sent to Caleb. He still doesn't notice. The timestamp was my birthday. I remembered I'd written Olivia a note that day about something I wanted to tell her in person. The card was never opened. It had gone missing. And now, I knew why. She took that too. I stood up, breath sharp, not angry, not anymore, just clear. They weren't just stealing property, they were rewriting the script, recasting characters, erasing scenes. Olivia came back into the room slower this time. Her face was pale. "Dad," she said, almost a whisper. "Be careful." I nodded once. I clutched the album like it was evidence. "If they rewrite my history," I said, "I'll be the one writing the final line." Then I left her there, alone in the kitchen, walked to my study, closed the door softly, deliberately. And in the quiet of that room, I didn't shout, didn't cry, I planned. Olivia's text came just after twilight. "Let's have dinner tonight." I knew the tone wasn't warm, more like a summons. I drove to her place feeling the weight of what I'd unearthed. The streetlights made the leaves look like embers. The house was quiet, windows dim, but the tension inside was electric. I entered to find fewer chairs than I expected. One seat was missing. Odd. Olivia stood near the door, her eyes flicking toward the windows, watching, waiting. She said quietly, "Mom couldn't make it." That clipped explanation hit me in the chest. It felt rehearsed. Dinner started coolly. Olivia placed the album Delilah gifted on the table, sliding it into my view. I watched as she flipped pages slowly, blank spaces, then photos where my face was faded or cropped out. The shift was so subtle I almost missed it until she asked, voice soft, "Why didn't you notice?" My heart pounded. This wasn't oversight, it was erasure. "When did you decide I didn't matter?" I said, barely louder than a whisper. Olivia's eyes filled with sorrow, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry," she began, but the shame in her tone was like salt in a wound. Then the doorbell rang. "Neighbors," she said. Just casual. But I knew it was deliberate. I left the room under that excuse, walked past guests through the hall. In the living room, laughter drifted. Delilah and others joked quietly. I was invisible. That was twist S12, the public exclusion. I excused myself again, stepping into the bathroom. Staring into that mirror, I saw a man pushed to edges, profile tight, expression resolute. When I returned, I caught Olivia's eyes as I asked, "Why am I being sidelined?" Her answer came soft but sharp. "We want peace. Your fights frighten people." "Peace?" I spat quietly. "This is disappearance by degrees." No anger exploded. I kept it coiled like a steel spring. I left my chair, placed the album between plates, and stood. Olivia reached toward me, voice cracking. "Don't go, Dad." I shook my head. "I'm not the one fading." And then I left. Walking out the front door, I felt the hush behind me, the eyes fading. Outside, under street lamps, I paused. Across the street, a van idled, tinted windows dark. Someone was watching. In that moment, resolve settled in my bones. They think they're erasing me. Tonight, I proved them wrong. When I got back from Olivia's dinner, the street was quiet, eerily so. I parked, sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. My house stood dark except for a faint glow from the upstairs hallway. I hadn't left any lights on. The key turned stiffly in the lock. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Not just temperature, something else. My boots echoed down the hallway. Each step sounded like it didn't belong. I noticed the living room lamp was off. I always left it on a dim setting. Always. And then I saw it. A framed photo on the hallway floor, face down. The one of me and Olivia on her graduation day. No broken glass. Just placed there, like a message. I walked toward the back of the house and paused. A faint hum came from my study, and that scent, Delilah's perfume, too familiar, too recent. Someone had been here. I moved into the study cautiously, stopped cold. My chair was gone. The old, worn leather one I'd read every newspaper in for 15 years, replaced by something sleeker, shinier, a designer recliner Delilah once raved about in a showroom. So much more modern, she'd said, waving her hand across its absurd angles. Back then, I told her it looked like a dentist's chair. Uncomfortable, sterile. Now it sat there like a flag staked into conquered ground. I stood for a long time staring. My chair wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was the last space that still felt like mine. And now it was gone. I sat on the edge of the new one, stiff. It creaked differently, smelled like a stranger. It didn't belong, and neither did I. Not anymore. I reached for my phone, needing to ground myself in something real. Olivia's voicemail. I needed to hear her voice again. But when I scrolled through my messages, nothing. Her message from earlier. Gone. My call logs. Trimmed. Older voice memos. Erased. My chest tightened. I wasn't being ignored. I was being wiped out. Quietly. Digitally. I closed my eyes, forced myself to remember her laugh. That call. The pause she always did before saying my name. I wasn't sure anymore if I'd imagined it. That silence left behind was sharper than noise. I stood, walked to the door, but paused. A soft creak from upstairs. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. I grabbed the flashlight I kept near the coat rack and crept up the stairs. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel. At the end, the attic panel was ajar. A string hung loosely. I pulled it down. Inside, a new wire ran across the beam. Clean install. No dust on it yet. Someone had been up there, watching. Recording. Not weeks ago. Recently. I stared up into that crawl space. "You think you can watch me fall apart?" I whispered. "Not tonight." I closed the panel. Back downstairs, I moved on instinct, locked every door, secured the windows. Pulled out my backup phone, the one Delilah never knew I kept. I opened my locked drawer, pulled out documents, birth certificates, tax returns, notarized copies of everything they'd said I'd lost or forgotten. I laid them on the table, a map of what they thought they'd erased. This wasn't about fighting back with fists or rage. It was about remembering, holding on to the pieces no one could rewrite. My regular phone buzzed. One text. Unknown number. "Saw you looking tonight." I stared at the screen. Not with fear, not anymore. They're watching. Good. Now they know. I see them too. Olivia's text came at 9:41 p.m. "Dad, come by. There's something I must show you." I didn't hesitate. Grabbed my coat, keys, and the folder I had tucked away for months. As I pulled out of the driveway, the air outside was thick. Not with fog, but with something heavier. Truth was coming, and it had a weight to it. By the time I reached her house, the porch light was off, but one dim lamp burned inside. She opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes were alert, nervous, but focused. No hugs, no small talk. She simply said, "Follow me." We walked in silence to her study, past photos I hadn't seen since they replaced them all. On the desk, Delilah's album sat open, but something was different. Olivia pointed to one of the pages. No photo. Instead, taped inside was a folded clipping from a local paper. "Look here," she said, voice barely above a whisper. It was an invitation to a charity gala from 6 months back. I remembered it well. I had the original framed once. This version was nearly identical, except one thing. My name wasn't there. It read, "Hosted by Delilah and family." No Wendell. My jaw locked. "This is the same event?" Olivia nodded. "This copy came in through Mom's email last week. I didn't notice until I saw yours again." I motioned for her to find my copy. She rummaged in a drawer and handed it over. Mine was handwritten, my name lightly penciled beneath Delilah's, then rubbed out. You could still see the faint smudge. "She removed you," Olivia said. The sentence hung there like smoke. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That silence said everything I couldn't yet put into words. Just then, Juniper walked in, barefoot, holding a juice box. She blinked at me. "Grandpa, she said softly. Mom says you shouldn't drive at night anymore. My breath caught. Not because of what she said, but because of who told her to say it. Olivia froze. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. I crouched down, lifted Juniper onto my lap. Sweetheart, I said gently, I'm okay, don't worry. She nodded and wandered off again like it meant nothing, but it did. Even the child had been woven into this narrative, one where I was fading, unreliable, disposable. I stood up and looked at Olivia. That was planted. She swallowed. I didn't mean for it to be like this, but it already was. Then she pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. There's more, she said, and handed it to me. An email, forwarded by accident, according to her, from Delilah to someone unnamed. He still doesn't notice how we control everything. Soon he'll have nothing. I read it again, then again. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. The confirmation didn't surprise me, but it burned just the same. So, I said, this is how far it's gone. Olivia reached for the phone, but I held it back. You knew, I said calmly. You knew, and you waited. I was scared, Dad, she said, voice trembling. I didn't know what you'd do. I stared at her, and in that moment I didn't see my daughter. I saw a gatekeeper. Don't worry, I said, I'm not angry. That was true, I was clear. I took a breath and placed the email and the invitation next to the album. Then I looked her square in the eyes. Tonight, I said, I reclaim my story. She didn't speak. I quoted softly, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I turned toward the door, coat folded over my arm. I'm not going to fight her in your living room, I added. This truth doesn't need yelling. It only needs light. She nodded, eyes glassy. For a second, I saw the child she used to be. I stepped out into the night. The street was quiet again, but not empty. As I reached my car, I saw her, Delilah, standing still across the street, lit faintly by the neighbor's porch light. No expression, no surprise. She knew I'd be here. She always knew. I woke up before the sun. No nightmares, no racing heart, just quiet. A kind of silence that didn't scream this time. It breathed. I stared at the ceiling, the lines in the plaster I'd memorized over the years, and thought back through everything. The clipped invitation, Juniper's words, the email Olivia finally showed me. I didn't feel rage, not sadness either. Just something like weightlessness. I got up slow, walked into the kitchen, and made my black coffee. No sugar, no cream, just like always. Let it brew while I leaned on the counter. The smell filled the space like it always had. Familiar. Steady. I remembered a quote I once wrote down from Fred Rogers. There are 3 ways to ultimate success. The first way is to be kind. The second way is to be kind. The third way is to be kind. I pulled out my old notebook, pages yellowed and corners curled, and added something new. I still matter. The blinds filtered in the early light. Outside, the birds were already at it, chirping without hesitation, without apology. That's what I wanted now. Nothing flashy, just steady, unapologetic peace. I went into the living room, picking up an old throw blanket that had fallen from the couch. As I straightened the cushions, I saw something on the floor, tucked just under the doorframe. An envelope. I didn't even need to open it to know who it was from. Delilah's handwriting had always been sharp, intentional, like she was carving the letters rather than writing them. Inside was a single sheet. No greeting, no apology. Just, you were always better than me. I stared at it a long time. No signature, no return address, just those 8 words. Honest, maybe. Regretful, not really, but real, finally. And that mattered more than any long-winded confession. I chuckled. Guess it takes losing to recognize what you had. I slid the letter into the drawer of my desk, not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't need to throw it away either. It wasn't a wound anymore, just a scar. That afternoon, I drove to the old community center. Place hadn't changed much. Still smelled like sweat and floor wax. I walked up to the front desk, introduced myself, and asked if they needed volunteers, specifically for young men dealing with fatherlessness. I can't rewrite my past, I told the director, but I can help someone else write a better one. She nodded, handed me a clipboard. I filled out my name, number, and left feeling 10 pounds lighter. Outside, I sat on a bench near the playground, watched a group of boys shoot hoops with zero concern for the world's problems. One missed badly and laughed so hard he fell over. That used to be Olivia. I made a note to write her a letter, not out of blame, but gratitude. She had the courage to break through, to show me the rot I'd been too loyal to notice. From there, I drove a little further than I usually would. Out to where Gerald was buried. I hadn't been in years. I brought flowers, nothing fancy, and stood over his grave. "Gerald," I said like he could hear me. "We made it through, buddy. Took me a while, but I didn't go out bitter." I sat beside his headstone and pulled out a small note I'd written earlier. "Thank you for being my mirror when I was blind." I tucked it under a corner of the stone, weighed it down with a pebble, then stood, stretched my back, and breathed deep. The air was warmer than I expected. Driving home, windows down, music low, I didn't think about what had been taken. I thought about what I'd reclaimed. That evening, I packed, not everything, just enough to remind myself that life wasn't meant to stay stuck. I had a trip in mind, Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Always said I'd go, never did. Until now. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and sent a short email to Olivia. "I'm proud of your strength. Let's talk soon." That was enough. I didn't need a reply. That wasn't the point. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, looked at the man staring back, wrinkled, gray, worn, but alive. "I walked through fire," I said out loud, "and didn't come out ashes." I stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea. No phone, no distractions, just the stars. And that's when I heard it, a knock at the door. Slow, deliberate. I turned my head and looked through the porch light, a silhouette. She stood there holding something in her hand, an old photograph, one I thought was long gone.